So we've got Lea Rainey, and she is the founder of Roots Zero Waste Market. And we thought you would be a great fit for this year's Boise Startup Week, since the theme is Be Resilient. You know, I think Roots Zero Waste Market is a great example of resilience in itself. And it is, as you've said to me, a closed loop system. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that means, and for our audience, if they don't know what closed loop system means?
Yeah, so for us, a closed loop system from a business perspective and from a consumer perspective is really knowing where all the things that you take on or all the things that you provide to the consumer, that they have a place to go. And so what we really want to do is make ourselves so that the loop always comes back to us, right? If we sell a jar of pasta sauce, right, we want that jar to go back into circulation and then not cause an impact, like in the landfill, or cause some kind of impact, which we still see here quite frequently because we don't have great recycling. So it's also about understanding the area that you live in and what's available to you in order to take advantage and make more of a closed loop. A big part of our closed loop system is, as a grocery store, food waste and not having food waste. So if it comes into us, then we have to take responsibility for it, where it's going to end up. And that's really what being a closed loop to me means. And self-sufficiency as well, right? So not relying on city services or other services as much as possible so that we can contain and manage our own waste streams, our own consumption streams. And that in effect has very little impact on the world that we live in or the communities that we're in.
So can you give me an example? Let's say, because I know you get a lot of fresh produce in. Mm-hmm. So let's say you get in, you've got tomatoes, you've got mushrooms, you've got onions, and you get to a particular point in time and you're like, oh gosh, these are starting to look not as fresh anymore. Yeah. What does it mean? Can you walk me through a process for you as Root Zero Waste Market, what that means?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of factors to consider, and this really spans across any business, right? Whether you're in perishable goods or whether you're in hard goods, and you're having to think about the influx of what you're taking in and what happens to it when it's done. So we'll take vegetables as an example, but I might also take some durable goods as well, because I'm sure some listeners are out there, or some watchers are, not in the grocery industry or the food industry.
Right.
So for instance, what it starts with is understanding what's coming in and what's coming out. So how much are we selling, right? How much volume are we moving? And we really look very closely at that to understand how we can be a just-in-time, and we hear that in tech all the time, right? Yep. A just-in-time retailer. And so that allows us to evaluate how much we really have to bring in so that we can avoid waste before we even start that process of what to do with it afterward, right? So we try and manage things on the front end so that we don't have as much to deal with on the back end, because that also means it could mean loss, right?
Totally.
Not just, oh gosh, now we're creating waste. So when we're in that situation, we first look at the volume and how we can be as efficient as possible in what we put on the floor. The second thing that we then look at is, okay, now that we have it, what are we going to do with it, right? And that's where the cafe comes in. And part of our resilience model is that we're not just, we don't just focus on one area, right? We have the cafe specifically to manage our waste. That's one of the stops on our closed loop system, is that we have a cafe that we can offload waste to if we want to, or damage. Sometimes people will just drop something on the floor. Like this morning, someone dropped a watermelon on his way out the door. It didn't break. It happened, but we know it's got a bruise, right? So instead of him being bummed out and having to just accept the fact he dropped the watermelon, it's really easy for me to just say, here, go get a new one. And we're just going to cut this up and we're going to make juice out of it. right? So the cafe allows us to manage that waste, but it also allows us to account for any losses that we might have just due to general consumer accidents, right? Or accidents that we have ourselves. And then finally, if something's not looking great, because not everything sells perfectly all the time, depending on the seasons, and we will run long on things, that gives us an opportunity to make that into something else. Maybe it's a frittata, or it goes in a lasagna, or whatever, if it's not looking its best, but it's still viable. Because for us, our food system has been so broken for so long. It's really important for us to understand that food is valuable and that it has more than one purpose. It's not just about the apple that you bite into, or that you juice. It's about what do you do with the pulp after you juice that? And we can make that into a muffin, right? And so then at the end of the day, that is a zero waste, closed loop apple that we've just purchased from a farm, a sustainable farm that's doing good work, sold to a consumer, and then potentially also used in the deli in 2 or 3 different ways.
That's a great example. I like that. I know you mentioned durable goods. Do you want to speak to that a little bit too?
So, yeah, these are a little trickier, right? So we also have a whole household section where we do bulk soaps and lotions and shampoos and laundry detergents. And most of the time, to alleviate the package waste that consumers have to take in, we allow them to buy in bulk, but that means we have to buy in bulk too. And so what that often means is that we get in 5-gallon buckets, or we maybe get in a 35-gallon drum of dishwashing liquid, right? So what do we do with that? Well, before we even purchase that, again, going back to a closed loop system and lessening our impact as a business on the environment, we already know that we have to have a plan before we can take on any of those durable goods. So some of those plans work out to be things like we put a deposit down on our 5-gallon containers from our laundry manufacturer, our laundry soap manufacturer. And that allows us to recycle those. So we send them back. We get, they take the deposit, and then we send it back to them so that they can be sure they're going to get that durable good back, and they can sterilize it, and then they can put it back out to the rest of the consumer market. So it's a really great way of also, just making sure all of that stuff stays in cycle.
So what inspired you to create this particular business model? I mean, because obviously, as I know, and as our watchers, listeners might or might not know, you're the only one west of where in the US?
Yeah, we're actually the only full service zero waste grocery store in the United States.
Okay.
So in the beginning, we thought, well, we might be the Northwest. There was another store that was looking at opening. But there are some zero waste stores in the US now. There are probably about 11 to 15 that really meet the model. While Europe has been doing this for the last 7 to 8 years, the US was really behind in that. And especially when we started, which was about 2.5 years ago. So you asked us why we started and what our why is. First of all, I think it's that, like most entrepreneurs that are watching this, we're problem solvers, right? I mean, that's really at the core of what made us want to start a business, was that we looked for a problem, and we actually saw a problem. And the biggest one being the global climate crisis. And the fact that, we evaluated what in our lives is really bothering us. And for us, just in our daily life, it was, the amount of packaged plastic waste that we had to take on, and the food waste that we were also generating as a result of just there being 2 of us. But we were always forced to buy in these very large quantities, in prepackaged plastic quantities usually, pantry staples like rice and beans and things like that. It always came in a plastic package. And while we tried to shop in bulk, those options were really limited as well. And maybe we could do 10% of our shopping in bulk, but the rest of it ended up being, especially for household goods, ended up being in plastic containers or plastic bottles or something like that. So we were really frustrated by that. And then we started to look at So that was the first one. And of course, our offhanded complaint was always, gosh, I wish they would just sell more stuff in bulk. And like, that would totally solve my problem. And I wouldn't have to go out and try and think about this as an issue. But that just wasn't happening. Nobody was stepping up the plate to do that. And so we started looking at grocery stores. And then when we looked at grocery stores, we got really worried. Because it wasn't just about our own consumer footprint that we were growing and building into the landfill or into recycling centers that were broken. It was really looking at grocery stores as a whole. The fact they haven't innovated in decades, right? Beyond maybe just moving things around in the store, not necessarily changing the way that their business model operates. The toll that that's taken on our food system, and manufacturing system and our retail goods systems started to become really concerning to us. And we noticed with very little effort in research that grocery stores are one of the biggest business polluters. So
interesting. I hadn't realized that.
Yeah. So grocery stores waste. Let's just talk about food and packaging really quick. I'll throw a couple of stats your way.
That sounds good.
Grocery stores waste 43 billion pounds a year of food and package waste. And this is just in the United States. This is not a global figure. So just in the US, 43 billion pounds a year of plastic and food waste goes straight to the landfill before consumers even get to purchase them.
Wow.
So that could be damage, that could be antiquated dating on Best Buy or use by dates. There's a myriad of reasons why that happens. Overbuying, overcommitments, because manufacturers, in order to have space on your shelves, you have to buy or lease space. I mean, there's a very, very intricate web of how things get on the shelf and then what happens to them. So overbuying, not ordering just in time, ordering in everything at once because you're committed to a contract. So that's really scary when we thought about that. And then we thought about, okay, if grocery stores waste 43 billion pounds and consumers then waste a third of all the food that they buy every single year, again, just in the United States, that is a massive problem that we have. And it's a massive climate issue, especially when you consider that 8% of our greenhouse gases are created, the methane gases are created solely by food rotting in landfills. So if we just remove that, then, or if we can make a dent on that, that's a really big deal. And we really wanted to try and change all of that from a social, from a food system, from an operating model. How can we do this to be good ecopreneurs?
I like that. That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah. And build something that maybe we can change this whole business model, right? So we think we took on a pretty tough problem to solve, but everybody does, right? Everybody that's looking at starting something, it's usually because of a personal desire to change something that's just not working for them.
Okay, so you've been in business for not quite a year, and obviously this was being brainstormed before this, and then of course, you've been open 6-ish months, and hey, there's a pandemic. Fun stuff that you get to deal with as an ecopreneur.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about what did that mean for you as a business owner? What did that mean for the business itself? What challenges or opportunities do you think has come out of this particular moment in time?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. We're young, right? And I think everybody hears from everybody, oh, your first 2 years is madness. It's so hard. Right. Nothing's going to go the way that you planned it. So, I mean, that probably gave us an advantage in some ways because we were ready for obstacles, right? We were ready for things to not necessarily go perfectly and to have to pivot and adjust. I'd say that also, as entrepreneurs or as people who are thinking about starting a business, oftentimes you're thinking about, well, what is sustainable? What is a sustainable business? What does that look like? And so it's really it's not an accident that we went into the grocery area, right? I mean, people always need food. So, on that level, I think in some ways it helped us because we are essential. On the other hand, I think the big surprise that came to us, and we have some speculation as to why, but while other big box stores were being just crushed and their shelves were being emptied, we didn't have that problem, and we actually had to lay people off. Which I never expected to do in our first year. I expected that we might be understaffed, and building this team of longevity, so we actually had to lay people off, which was unexpected. And there were a couple of weeks there that we maybe had 15 shoppers a day,
Wow.
Hardly anyone coming in. I will also say we exist today because of the people that were shopping with us in the first 6 months. So that's also a really nice thing. If you know that you're building a good base as a business owner, it's the fact that when there's really no way to market, no way to get people to come out because they're sequestered and they're staying at home, if you have a really good base of regular shoppers, and they're coming in to support you and keep you afloat, I think that felt really good to us, to know that we had such a loyal group of people shopping here a lot, like yourself and others.
Yeah, definitely. So, knowing, I mean, we've talked a little bit about resilience and what that means for you as an organization. Are there other ways in which you feel you've developed new resiliency this year, you personally as a business owner, and or the store itself as well, because of where we are at this moment in time?
Yeah, I think we are digging in deeper to that belief that, and don't get me wrong, Idaho is an agriculturally rich region. So we probably have some advantage versus other states out there that might not have the same opportunity that we do. But I will say that it just made us know how important it was for us to continue this business model, this work that we're doing, because we are supporting regional and sustainable farmers, first and foremost. We are giving those farmers that don't have outlets traditionally, we tend to support the medium and the micro-sized farms. We do have one large supplier out of Eugene who is employee owned and farmer owned, right? So we are able to get things that grow outside of our region, and that company, does the same thing we do. They work with sustainable farmers. And so everything we're sourcing, it might come from Oregon, but it's a medium sized farm in Oregon. So they just bring all these kind of medium sized farms together. So we're just building on that chain of this regional supply of not massive, big ag growers, but these smaller farms that are doing the right thing. And how important that is. So we don't want that to break. We don't want our local farmers, as we've all seen them struggle, to pivot and figure out what are they going to do with their crops this year if they don't have if there isn't a farmer's market to sell them in, if they're, which they rely on wholeheartedly. So we've really gotten to test out what resiliency means, right? What it means to be a resilient business, and that is taking advantage to us of all the growers and the makers around us as much as possible, so that when nationally things aren't available, they are regionally. And then that allows us to continue to serve our consumer base in that way. So I think it just reiterated everything that we were already thinking, but really put it in a real-time scenario,
Yeah, it, very much put it in a real-time scenario. If you had any advice that you wish you had been given at the outset, and or that you would like to pass on to fellow entrepreneurs, fellow ecopreneurs,
Yeah.
what would that be?
Yeah, I think, there are a few things. So I think building in resilience from the beginning is really helpful, no matter what you're doing. And so I'll just take a brick and mortar, for instance. So for us, when we first thought about doing this, we actually were going to just do like a small kind of shop. And what we ended up doing is finding the building that was the perfect building and took a bigger leap into our full model, right? We didn't like stage it. And that can be really scary sometimes. But the way that we worked around that was that we built in a sublet, right? To help us pay, because we weren't really sure, like, are we really going to be able to, what is our revenue going to be? We didn't know. So kind of building in contingencies wherever you can, I think is really important to just help ease the stress of starting your first business. So whatever, and kind of looking at where your weaknesses are, right? So for us, our core is grocery and household goods, and that takes up a lot of room. It also is notoriously something that has the lowest margins, right, for profit. But it's core. It's important that we change that and that we prop that up in some way. And so, but in some ways it's a weakness, also a lot of waste, or can be a lot of waste. So to help with that, we also then have the deli, right, which is a little bit of a higher margin, has more traffic, is more consumer friendly than bulk shopping for people who aren't used to the concept. So we looked at where our weaknesses might be from a revenue perspective and from a mindset or a consumer change perspective, and we kind of added on to that. And then within that, we also added on to that. It was like, okay, well, now that we have a deli, maybe we could do catering, which we do. And that's kind of its own separate business. And then, we have coffee and juice. And so maybe we can have kind of like coffee and a juice bar. And, so it's not that, it's just that you're continuously trying to build your full mission up, right? And that could be in software, that could be anything, but sticking with one thing makes it more difficult. You have to work a lot harder to make that one thing work. But if you kind of look at, okay, what's my whole business and what's my why? There are probably some weaknesses that you can prop up with other skills and services.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Lea.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.